to what could be a very interesting episode of Smoked Meat with Jeff, because we got a little bit of a rainstorm going on right now, so it's a little bit dark and stormy. So what better drink to have while we're babysitting our smoker than a dark and stormy? Perfect. So this rum-based drink is, you're going to learn how to make this, check out one of my cocktail time videos. But today we're going to be taking care of a little bit of a specialty dish today. We're going to be doing some smoked duck. And I have a duck that just didn't bother to make it down south for the winter, so it's going to end up on my smoker today. Just real basic ingredients. This is a fairly easy recipe to make. I'm going to be doing a sesame and ginger glaze on my duck when we get towards the end of the smoking session. So let's move on to some of the basic ingredients, both food and non-food ingredients that you're going to need to make this happen. And I do apologize if the sound is a little rough today, because I've got my metal awning here and we're just getting pounded with a little bit of rain right now. So let's move on to some of the supplies. We're going to need a couple of just a couple specialized supplies for working with our duck today. Let's start with the non-food ingredients. Of course, you're going to need a measuring cup because we're going to do some mixing. You're going to need a large syringe. This is a meat basting syringe. We're going to use this for getting a lot of the flavor up under the skin of our duck. And you're going to need a basting brush, and this won't come into play until towards the end of the smoking session. And of course, I've got my Bradley rack to put the duck on to make things a little bit easier. Food ingredients, real basics. You're going to need a duck. Now, I went ahead and I brined this duck, which that step is completely optional. And if you want to know how to brine, check out the basics section of my YouTube channel. It'll outline how to do an appropriate brine. So I did a buttermilk brine on this for about 6 hours. And now we're ready to go with getting this ready for the smoker. Of course, you can see that I've got it running in the background. Probably going to be steaming a lot today because of all the rain cooking off the top of the smoker. Other food ingredients that we're going to need, we're going to use a little bit of yellow mustard, and this is going to be basically a carrier for holding our spices onto the outside of our smoked duck. And then we're going to need some salted butter. We're going to melt this down into a sauce in which we're going to add some more of our spices, and we're going to inject that underneath the skin of our duck. And then towards the end of the cooking process, this is some homemade sesame and ginger glaze that I've made. It's kind of a teriyaki base, sweetened up with some brown sugar, added in some sesame oil, sesame seeds, and of course some fresh ginger, and we're going to glaze this towards the end. You don't want to do it right away, because when this thing is sitting on the smoker for a number of hours, you'll end up burning the outside of it because this has got such a high sugar content. So we're going to use this as a glaze towards the end and rely on the seasonings that we're going to inject under the skin to really give this thing a lot of flavor. Now, as far as how many ducks you're going to need, if you purchase a single duck, that's enough meat to feed about 4 people. So this could be a great any time of year meal, but it's also a really nice touch if you want to do a holiday or a special occasion kind of meal. So let's go ahead and move on to getting this prepped and onto the smoker, and I'll talk to you about temperatures, types of wood, and cook times while we're prepping this. All right, it's time to get our duck prepped and ready for the smoker. I went ahead and I melted my 2 sticks of butter into a measuring cup here. And we're going to go ahead and mix in our spices. Now these are going to be the spices that we are going to inject to get underneath the skin. We're not going to be injecting into the meat. We're going to be injecting under the skin to get these flavors in there. So whatever spices you want to go with, here I've got my homemade sweet and spicy mix. You want to make sure that it is a fairly fine spice mix, because you don't want to clog up your basting needle with it. So we're just going to take a few, let's see, 1, 2, let's get about 3 tablespoons. into our butter and just mix this in really well. And this is just to get that flavor underneath the skin. Now we're using butter as the carrier, which is, I love butter, but it just works out really well for getting the spices under the skin. Since we're cooking duck today, which is a very fatty bird, we don't really need to use a lot of extra butter, but as far as I'm concerned, the more butter the better. Alright, and here we have our duck. Typical duck's going to be about 6 pounds, and I believe this one came in just at 6 pounds. And all you're going to do is take your basting needle, fill her up, and then just work your way underneath the skin in a couple of places and start injecting your flavor mix. You're going to notice that the skin itself will bubble up as you inject it in, just like it would every time you went to the doctor to get an immunization. Not a big deal. Just randomly and evenly start injecting your duck and flip it over and get the other side taken care of as well. And remember, you just want to go right under the skin. We're not aiming for getting down into the meat itself. Alright, at this point we are done with our basting needle. I got almost the full 2 sticks of butter injected underneath the skin here with all that flavoring throughout the duck itself. And if you haven't figured it out by now, this is going to make quite a mess. The next step is to take just use everyday plain yellow mustard and just put a real thin coat starting on the bottom of the duck itself. And all this is doing is allowing you to put your spices on and keep them there so they don't kind of fall off. Keep a towel handy. You're going to need it. Go straight into the wash when you're done so you don't worry about any contamination. So I've got the mustard on. I'm going to take my spices. Just put down a nice little coat of spices on the outside. And remember, there's a lot of the spice underneath the skin, so you don't have to go nuts. And we are going to glaze this towards the end. So I got the bottom side done. Flip it over so that I can do what I call the top. Technically it's the bottom of the duck. We're going to cook this with the breast side up. And we're just going to repeat with the mustard and the spices. And then we'll get this thing onto the smoker. And this is what the duck looks like before we get it onto the smoker. So we're going to put this on the smoker at 250 degrees. It's going to take between 4 and 6 hours depending on the size of your duck. An average duck is around 6 pounds, which will put us at about the 5-hour mark if you keep it at the 250 degrees. At about 4.5 hours, we are going to start glazing this with our Sesame ginger glaze, and you can use whatever you want. Jams work really well for this. Jellies and jams if you want to add that sweetness to it. And our target temperature, internal temperature in the thickest part of the breast, you're going for about 160, 165 degrees for finished temperature. Now, during that last half hour, well actually let me back up a little bit. At about, see, we're going to take about 5 hours on this. At about the 4-hour mark, I'm going to start working on kicking up the temperature of our smoker to kind of crisp up the skin on the outside, sort of like what we do with the turkey. And then about half hour before it's done, we will glaze, keep that temperature going so we get the flavor without turning the skin into rubber. So let's go ahead and get this onto the smoker on this dark and stormy day. Don't forget your cocktail. And start our journey to deliciousness. All right, we've got the duck on the smoker. let me mention to you the type of wood that you want to do for your duck. Duck lends itself really well to smoking with a fruit wood. So I'm going to be doing pecan today, but cherry or pear or even apple wood would be great for this. But you want to stick with a fruit type of wood, not so much an oak or a mesquite, just because the flavor really lends itself well with the duck flavors and of course the duck fat that's going to be rendered throughout the cooking process. So as you can see, I got the smoker going. We'll come back in a little while and check on this, and we'll see if the day gets worse or better with this this dark and storminess today. Oh, that's coming along nicely. It's looking pretty good. The whole cavity is just full of liquid. So let's go ahead and check our temperature. We should be getting pretty close to where we want to be to start crisping the skin. Perfect. So we're at 155 right now. Actually, we're closer to 160, so we're getting pretty close. So at this point, we're going to put this back on the smoker, but I'm going to really kick up the temperature on this to around 350 or so, if I can get it up that high. Anywhere between 3 and 350 to kind of crisp up the skin a little bit. We'll keep it in the smoker for about 15-20 minutes to let the skin crisp up, and then I'm going to take it out again and we'll go ahead and get it glazed. And then we'll throw it back in the smoker to finish, and we should be getting pretty close to dinner time with our smoked duck. And there we go. We've got our duck. The skin is starting to crisp up, and that fat under the skin is starting to render. So now it's time to take care of the final stage of this, and we're going to glaze this with. I've got my what was this? This was ginger and sesame glaze that I made. It's a kind of like a teriyaki base, but add some sesame seeds, a little bit of oil, and of course some fresh ginger. My homemade blend, but you can use just about anything for glazing your duck. Jams and jellies, those work well. Cherry juice, you can even do it with some barbecue sauce, but I'm going to stick with this today. Just brush it on everywhere you can get to without actually turning over your duck, because the cavity is full of liquid and you don't want to lose all of that. Once this is glazed, I'm going to throw it back onto the smoker. Should take about another half hour or so, and this will crisp up as well. And then we'll take it out, let it sit and rest for a little bit, maybe 10-15 minutes, and then it's time to get on to carving and serve this up for dinner. So I am going to finish this up, get it back on the smoker, and then we'll finish this up with just some pictures of the final product, and it's time to eat. So this is Jeff with Smoked Meat with Jeff. You may not see me again after this, because we're going to go straight into pictures. Till next time, have fun on your smoker and enjoy that duck.